What are the cycles fathers pass down that sons are left to heal? What if being a man wasn't about holding it all together, but learning how to let go? This is a space where men speak truth and find the power to heal and transform. I'm Mike Della Rocha. Welcome to Sacred Lessons. Sometimes we think our stories aren't worth telling, but every story holds a key, a bridge between grief and understanding, the seen and unseen world, between father and son. Welcome to Sacred Lessons. I'm Mike Della Rocha. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my dear friend of almost 30 years, Tad Nakamura, an award-winning filmmaker, father, husband, and son of a legend, the godfather of Asian American cinema, Robert A. Nakamura. His new film, Third Act, is both a son's love letter and a meditation on legacy, grief, and activism. It's a testament how film can heal not just the storyteller, but entire communities. Before my book, Sacred Lessons, and his film, Third Act, were released, we had the opportunity to share them with each other. I remember watching the film and crying uncontrollably because our lives were mirroring each other. So this episode is extremely personal to me as someone who has known Tad for most of my life and watched him grow into not only one of today's most impactful storytellers, but also into a loving father, son, and husband.
Thanks, man. No, appreciate you. Appreciate you inviting me to be part of this. It's just all part of the journey, but we can get into it. But you've been a gift. Your book was a gift at a key time, and so it's just an honor to be here.
Yeah, I was so excited driving over here because of all the guests. We've known each other the longest. We were in our teenage years. We both went to UCLA. We both grew up with the blessing and the shadow of these big fathers. We both found our love in like water and subcultures. We were both football players. And from the moment I met you, I was like, man, I wish I could be the Chicano version of Tad. And before we even jump in, I just want to say how grateful I am that you have blessed my life with your friendship and carrying on the legacy of your parents in such a profound and deep way with the filmmaking, with the Institute, with all this stuff that you've always been rooted in this value of being in service to the world. And so you're a role model for me personally. So I just want to say thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thanks. No, appreciate that. I think, like you said, I first met you when I was 18, just a kid. And, I think every stage, right, when you're a freshman in high school, there's like the cool seniors. And then, when you're a freshman in college, you weren't a senior then, but you were still like the upperclassman. You were still like the cool senior to me. And ever since then, I've looked up to you. And I think that was the cool part is reading your book, I realized and found out how similar we are. I mean, I always felt a very specific connection to you. But I think reading the book, listening to you read the book especially, I was like, oh, all these different, both past and present, so many parallels. But want to really just thank you for, I think I was just mentioning, my niece is now a freshman in college, and just that time, you're just such a mold of clay, but also a sponge. And you really impacted me and inspired me on the path that I'm on today and continue to be on. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks. Well, let's jump in. So I was sharing, right? Like you were making this film Third Act while I was writing the book Sacred Lessons. And unbeknownst to each other, we didn't know that. And it was like I was writing your film and you were making the book into a film. And we had the opportunity before they were released to like read and watch. And like, I was just so moved. One, because I had a deeper understanding of who you are and who your family is. But before we jump in, for those that haven't seen Third Act, can you share what that film is about?
Yeah, so Third Act is a feature documentary about me and my dad, Robert A. Nakamura, who you mentioned in the intro. At first, it was just going to be a biopic about his life, kind of a portrait of an artist, celebration of his accolades. And once we started doing the interviews, about early in the production, he got diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so that really shifted from, once we realized anyone could make a film on my dad's accolades, on his career, but what film could I only make as his son, as a filmmaker? So that became kind of our North Star. But I think because we worked on the film for so long, it took us 7 years to make it. COVID happened in the middle of that. The process was actually very in a way similar to what we're doing right now, except we didn't have any crew, and so it was just me and my dad in his office, um, sitting across from each other, and I think we realized that the process was special, especially me processing, becoming a father myself, but also, I've always been afraid. I had this anxiety of losing my dad. Um, he's always been an older dad. Growing up, kids used to think he was my grandpa, things like that. And then for him, being in the sunset of his life, in the third act of his life, uh, got a chance for him to process his own mortality. But we got to do that together. So that became, the film eventually became more of a father and son story than a portrait of an artist. And but it also includes not only me and my dad, but my Ji-chan, my dad's dad, and then my son Prince. So it's 4 generations. Again, similar or exactly the same as your book. And I think at first I wanted to write a love letter and a thank you letter to my dad. But what was cool about the process is that I, I literally got to tell him that, and he literally got to tell me how proud he was. So I was able to check that box before the film was even done. Um, and then from there, it just in a weird way, I started to hold on to it because I realized this was going to be the last project me and my dad were going to work on. My dad is my mentor. He had worked, on helped me with all my films up to this point. And so I actually caught myself, as well as the producer Yuri Chung, who's my good friend and was actually my dad's student also at UCLA. Caught myself wanting to procrastinate finishing the film, wanting to shoot more and more and more, even though we had to finish the film. But it was like kind of giving him a hug, and that last hug, and not wanting to let go, because I knew when the film was done, so would our working relationship, at least.
Were you able to tell your dad things through the filmmaking process that you weren't able to say before then?
Yeah, because like most men, especially of his generation, Asian men, Japanese specifically, we don't talk. We talk, but we don't talk about how we feel about each other face to face. What's interesting is that, that's why I wanted to include the shots of us driving to the Rose Bowl. The only time me and him really talked was in the car. And I think that's because it wasn't like this, like looking at each other. Even though we're side by side in a very intimate setting, we're still both looking out the windshield. So that kind of became a buffer, right, of this uncomfortability. So that's the only one of the few times, well, not a few, but we would always talk and catch up pretty intimately in the car. And so I think there was, I think that one, we're making a film, so I had a director's hat on and a son's hat on, and I think the director in me pushed me to either ask the hard questions or to articulate how I felt. But also because of, his health was declining, he had this uncurable disease diagnosis. So I realized that the clock was ticking and didn't know how much time I'd have left. So that is the thing that I think really pushed me to say, I literally just said, thank you for everything you've done for me, but also trying to articulate um, how much I appreciated, and didn't take that in vain. But I think what was I didn't realize it. So I tried to explain, share it in the interviews, but what I realized the most impactful part of the process was writing the voiceover. And I'm sure you had to do that with writing the book of, life is just so go, 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 go. And I think us as men, or maybe people in general, at least I'll just speak for myself. I I realized how not in tune with my own emotions, because my editor and producer, for the voiceover for a certain scene, they'd be like, "Well, how do you feel, or how did you feel?" And a simple question like that, I couldn't answer. So, a good friend of mine, Tracy Kacho Kiriyama, helped me with journaling practices to get the voiceover written. And so I sat down and forced myself to really write down how I felt and had conversations with myself on paper. But that whole process, what that really did, it prepared me to, after the film had released, he had, you know, he had seen the film, but when his health really declined, and I was really lucky to know when the last conversation I would have with him, because he, at the very end, he was in hospice at home. He had good days and bad days, and it was probably 3 days before he died, he got this burst of energy, and I think a lot of, I talked to hospice nurses, and they said a lot of people have this burst right before they pass. And, we actually went outside. He hadn't left his room, for days. And in that moment, I knew this was going to be the last conversation I was ever going to have with my dad. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And it's only because of the process, specifically journaling, that I was prepared for that moment. And, just to be vulnerable, I'll share, one of the things that I told them was, it's okay. Like, you don't have to hold on. I'll be okay. You don't have to worry about me anymore. And he looked at me and he said, I'm always going to worry about you. And that, I knew exactly what he meant by that. He knew he wasn't worried about me being a filmmaker. He wasn't worried about me carrying on his legacy. But he was worried about, me being a good husband, me being able to provide for my family, and worried about me not enjoying my kids as much as I'm a good father, but to really enjoy. And the fact that he said, I'm always going to worry about you, meant he's always going to be with me. And that he'll always be thinking about me. But as the father, and now as a father, I get it. It's concern, right? You want to be there, and that's the hardest part of being a father too. Is this vulnerability, and I just realized, well, and then also too, one of the other things I said was, well, we did it, we made the film, and he looked at me and he said, it's amazing. And so that, that's priceless. And I really, it was only because of the process of making the film that maybe both of us were prepared to have that last conversation.
I'm getting all emotional over here because that's such a beautiful thing to be able to have that moment. And one of my favorite moments was when you premiered the film at the Japanese American Museum in downtown, and you were able to share what you said privately to your dad publicly in front of a sold out audience. And then your dad gets wheeled out in a wheelchair. And I must have lost a pound of water because I was crying so much, because it's like, wow, what a beautiful gift to give to someone who's on the path to transitioning to spirit world. Before the filmmaking, did you and your dad, did you say I love you? Or was it only those times when you were driving to the Rose Bowl? Because it's so hard for men to look each other in the eye, because then that's where our spirit lives. Like, you could see our souls that way, and then that will allow you to like really be strong enough to share whatever emotion needs to come out. And our fathers came up in a generation where you didn't do that. And, you know, in fact, you like kind of look down. Like, Chicano Japanese culture is like humble, you know, and you don't make eye contact now that you're talking like that. But did you guys have that kind of relationship before the film, or did the film catalyze that for you guys to be more emotionally expressive to each other?
I think, you know, growing up as a kid, I always remember telling him I love, just, as a kid, I love you, Dad. And I'm sure he would, respond, but again, it's funny, right? Because when it's a baby, when there's a kid, I don't think men have any problem with telling them they love you. But as I got older, as I became a teenager, closer to an adult, and later as an adult, I think it became more uncomfortable for him. The good thing though about my dad was he's the one that broke the cycle, So I'm fourth generation Japanese American, but on my dad's side, it's a little complicated because my bachan, his mom is second generation, is Nisei, but my jichan, his dad is first generation Issei. So I think for sure my jichan never said that to my dad, and but my dad was self-aware, and he would always tell me, like, even recently, he's like, he was self-aware that how hard it was for him, but he still wanted to try. But usually what would happen is I would say, I love you, Dad, and he'd just pat me on the back and go, okay. That was his way. But I what I am proud of is, the last 5 years, every time I would see him, I love you, Dad, and he would say, I love you too. And what was cool is, when he was on his deathbed, and we knew this was going to be, the last time, we brought all the grandkids one by one. And then I brought my son, and, he is 9 years old, and I try to talk to him about, death and what's happening, but you still just don't know what's registering. And so when I brought him up there, he said, I love you, Bob. He said, I love you forever, and I'll see you in my dreams. And my dad wasn't very conscious, but I was holding his hand, and he tapped my hand just to respond to my son. But what's funny is that I bring my daughter up, and my daughter's 5, and she just says, I love you, Bob. And for my daughter, he said, I love you too. And then also when my niece went, she said, he responded. So even on his deathbed, he felt more comfortable saying I love you to his granddaughters than to his grandson and grandsons. So anyway, sorry, I got kind of caught up in the story, forgot the question, but yeah, I think, but for sure, he's that generation that would show his love instead of say it. And the first time I really saw that and was really touched is the first film I had that had a PBS broadcast premiere. It was a big deal, and it was the week before the broadcast. My dad, and he didn't tell me he did this. I think someone else told me. Maybe it was my mom, but he went to each neighbor on our block and knocked on their door and gave him a flyer and said, "Hey, my son's film is going to be on TV. You should watch it." And he's not the kind of guy to talk to neighbors at all. This is the first time he probably went to, met them. And plus, he didn't want to even tell me that. But that was a way that he really showed me his love, and I was really touched. But I am proud. By the end of his life, I had said it so much. My sister had said it so much. The grandkids said it so much that he was actually very comfortable saying "I love you" to me.
So beautiful. This whole journey we've been on, has allowed me to finally accept that our fathers did the best they could with us, in the sense of having grandfathers that were emotionally hardened, that our fathers didn't know the language of love, but they showed it in such incredible ways. And how beautiful to see this Asian man going door to door with neighbors that didn't even know who he was, because he was so proud of you, and stepping outside of his own comfort zone. That's how big his love was for you. And that's one of so many things that we probably don't even know he did. And I sit with the tension of that like image in my mind, where then the image of, minutes, hours before transitioning and not being able to say "I love you" to the grandkids, but with the granddaughters is just fully.
Mm-hmm.
And those moments, have they impacted the way you father your own children?
It definitely has. It's funny because I'm sure you're the same. I probably say "I love you" too much. I even asked my daughter. I was like, I say it to, "I love you," like, and then I said, "Do I say that too much?" She's like, "Kind of," where it might be losing its potency.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I've been ever since, as I'm become, get more and more used to and experience being a father, and now that my dad has passed, I'm starting to look at things through a father's eyes, his eyes as a father. So, so we had the privilege of premiering the film at Sundance this January, and I think it was all about him, right? To me, made this film for him. This is the last, finally he can get his flowers when he's still alive to appreciate it and enjoy it. Also, too, he's kind of the main subject of the film. He's the one I feel that got a standing ovation. But I'm realizing that he was experiencing that whole time as a father. He wasn't experiencing that moment as, "Oh, this is me. People are here for me. This film's about me." He was there seeing his son fulfill a goal and fulfill a dream. And I think for my kids, right? My son scores a basket at his basketball game. I feel this immense pride just for one basket. And so I could just now imagine him not only watching me become a filmmaker, working with me side by side, but that moment of being there on stage together, he was more proud. And that level of pride as a father, whether it's silent or not, it's just on another level, right? Way more important than anything accolade you get. And so that I'm reinterpreting even this last year through the eyes of a father, and that's been really cool.
And this whole time, has there been I know there's a series of moments, but is there a particular moment that touches you the most from this whole journey with them?
And I think what I'm realizing is that he really did hold on for us. And he was in a wheelchair. I mean, he was he that moment that you mentioned at the LA premiere in Little Tokyo, he passed a month later. And so I'm just realizing, for for me, if I have like a cold or like I pull the muscle, like I start complaining having to go to work or just anything. And he went to Park City, Utah, where I mean there's icy, it's snowy. He's in a wheelchair, going on a plane to a car, but realizing that nothing was gonna stop him from being there. And so for me, I appreciate the physical struggle that he was willing to endure because he knew I wanted him to be there. I mean, to the point where his last couple weeks, it was I was always telling him, when we're making the film, was like, all right, Dad, like let's just finish this film, right? And then once we got into Sundance, like, all right, let's just make it to Sundance. I need, and I would tell him selfishly, like, I need you with me. Like, I'm cool with you going eventually, but I need you right now. Um,
How would he respond? He said,
he would say, he would nod his head and basically say, I got you. But to the point where my mom, he was really suffering at the end. And my mom had to pull me aside and say, you can't tell him to keep on holding on. Like, he'll do anything for you, including living longer than he wants to. And so that's why in that last conversation, I said, it'll be okay. Like, I'll be all right. You can go now. And he needed that, because I don't think if I would have said that, he would have held on, even though he was going, he was not in a good place. So I realized how much he was doing just for me and my sister. And that just, the more and more time passes by, the more I appreciate that.
Through this whole process and now the grieving process, it's like they say, like, there's no workbook for being a father, and there's no workbook for dealing with the profound loss of the most important man in your life, which at least for us was our fathers. Was there particular lessons that you are learning in real time in this whole grieving process?
Well, that, I really want to thank you, because, when you sent me the early version of the book, my dad was in pretty good health, but it was actually he died June 11th, and I think you had dropped the audiobook maybe a month.
June 3rd.
Yeah, that month. And so it was this amazing thing and gift where I was actually, he was in hospice, and then my mom actually had to go to the hospital. So me and my sister were the only ones that became his caretakers. And so I would spend the night with my dad. I mean, anyone who's experienced, again, this is those of us who are lucky enough to experience a loved one going through hospice. I think a lot of people don't even get a chance to do that. But anyone who's, really gone through that, it's facing your fears right in the face. I mean, seeing my dad die, seeing him decline. And so I would spend the night with him, help him to go to the bathroom, like all that shit, right? The dark, the heavy stuff. But then I would listen to your audiobook. And the storytelling was so great, and it was your journey and your family to where it was a distraction. It could get my mind off of what was going on in the present, but I was actually at the same time learning from your book those lessons in real time of how to deal with what I was going through. So, when I was listening to your book about going to the beach, that's the first thing I did. I to reset after those heavy nights with my dad, I would go to the beach and connect and reset. I mentioned to you before for my family, it's always been moths that represent, the dead coming to visit, or spirits or ancestors' presence. But it wasn't until I read your book that, for you and your family, it was monarch butterflies. So little things like that, ever since I read your book, every time I see a monarch butterfly, especially, I think of my dad. And I texted you that story about, maybe a month after he died, my son had a basketball tournament in the Japanese American basketball leagues in Vegas. And anyone knows my dad, like, it's funny because, my dad's known as this film Asian American studies professor, godfather of Asian American media. But really, he would talk about gambling and food the most out of anything. And Vegas was his favorite spot. Probably similar to many Asian families. That so and that had been the first time I'd been to Vegas in a long time. But anyone in my family, when we go to Vegas, we think of my dad. And as soon as we pulled up into this casino, the hotel lobby, I look up and there's these huge, fake monarch butterflies. And I was just like, all right, he's with me. But again, if it wasn't for your book, I wouldn't have had that experience, and I wouldn't be able to sense him. And even too, it was interesting. After he passed, I went to the beach, and I still can't articulate it, but realizing he is now everything, right? He's the water. When I see the clouds, especially when we were we screened the film in Hawaii a couple months ago, and we were able to spread his ashes in the ocean. So I think one of the lessons since he's passed is learning how to still maintain that relationship. And I'm starting to realize that. Even, we're talking about masculinity, right? A couple months after he passed, I'm driving. I'm driving. Actually, driving my son back from his taekwondo practice, and it's one of these things that I'm at a stop red light, and it's a no turn on red, and then this guy's honking at me because it's a red light, but I normally could turn, and then he pulls up on me, right, and kind of revs up, and then again, right, we're talking about these instincts that we're constantly trying to unlearn. I stick my chest out. But it was funny because it was this, I was trying to be nice, but in this aggressive way. So I rolled down my window and I'm just like, it's no turn on red. You good? And he goes, I'm good. But it was, but then he peels out and turns in front of me. And at that moment, I hear my dad in my ear, like, idiot, like, for a red light, you rolled down the window. Anything could have happened at that moment, right? With your son in the back. And that, I knew exactly what he would have told me, and I could hear it. And that was a clue of like, okay, he's always going to be in my ear, even though he's not here physically.
I was a part of a beautiful men's circle last night. And someone, Jose Leon, shout out to Homeboy Industry, says, we always have voices in our heads. And, you can interpret that in different ways. It could be our fathers, it could be ancestors. But the question that no one ever asks is like the voice in your head. Yeah, who is that? But who's listening? Mm-hmm. And that who's listening is that dance between you or the evolution of your father. And so that's why he's like, hey, Menso, what are you doing? But the who's listening is the part that we're becoming, this area of becoming. With your son in the back in that story, especially since the transition to spirit world with your dad, do you see yourself as a different father, or there's ways that you're raising him that are different now that your dad's no longer physically with us?
It's been so, there hasn't been that much time. He only passed, a handful of months ago. So I don't know if there's a difference since he's passed, but there's definitely as he's getting older. So, my son's 9 now, and that 9, that's starting to not be your little boy, or he doesn't want to be your little boy and coming into his own. So I'm I'm actually revisiting my childhood through the eyes of my dad or through the eyes of a father versus a kid, and really trying to. It's interesting. I wouldn't say I'm. It's ever evolving as a father, but more since he's passed, I've been looking at my childhood through his eyes more than anything else. For example, just this on the car tip, and there's a scene in the film in third act when my dad explains, when he was so my Jichan was a gardener, and on the weekends and the summers, like most gardeners' kids, my dad had to work with him, and so my Jichan and my dad are driving in his gardener truck, and someone pulls and puts their foot off the brake and rolls back and hits my Jichan's car, and this white guy comes out, and comes to my Jichan's door and says, you hit me, and you're a dirty Jap gardener, and I've always, as a kid, you're like, if I was me, I would have whooped his, and also too, my Jichan was a black belt judo master. He could have easily whooped this guy's ass. And the thing that I always thought about was like he was also at the time undocumented. And so, you can only do so much in that situation. But now I'm also realizing that to my Jichan, his son is right next to him. So if anything goes down, it's putting his son in jeopardy. So as a father, he chose to take the smarter route, didn't say anything, and safely, got away. But it reminded me of this time. It's very similar. I was probably 12, 13, and driving with my dad, and we're in a parking lot, and same thing. We're looking for parking, and some guy pulls out and almost hits my dad. And so they honk, and this guy just wouldn't let it go. And this guy, actually gets out of his car, and then, whether he mentioned it or not, I took it as a not even a microaggression. Like, he said, "Open your eyes," right? And as an Asian American, that's anything about eyes is fucking fighting words. And then he came out the car and looked at me and said, "Open your fucking eyes." And then he looked at him and then spit on the ground. And I actually got out of the car and got in this guy's face. It was like, "Fuck you," da 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 da. And my dad, that's when my dad sparked. He said, "Get in the car," and then we drove home, and he was not only at the time, right? He yelled at me like, like, that was so dumb. It's not worth it. You don't know what this person could do. But I think from then on, he also realized I'm at that stage where I'm now in this danger zone, right? I'm not a kid. All the dangers that men of color, men in general, adults can face, he had realized I had reached that stage. And that actually triggered this whole anxiety. Ever since then, that moment was like, I need you to, you got to call and check in. Like, he became very paranoid and worried. But yeah, it's interesting, those parallels of stories. Again, it's both connected to these concepts that we grow up as of men. As one is, don't let anyone, we're always taught, don't let anyone disrespect you. But then even currently, I think it's even in a progressive culture, it's okay to still but don't let anyone disrespect your family, right? That there's a line that you can't, and so it's still, I think, we're both probably, you're doing a much better job, but it's this constant work that we have to do to both unlearn and then relearn. But at the same time, and that's what I'm constantly trying to struggle with as a father, at what elements of this hypermasculinity, this toxic masculinity, that I know helped me actually survive and get through certain situations that my kids will also need. But I don't want to pass that on. And I'm sure there's another way to survive and to get through. I just don't know that. So that's something, I'm constantly been struggling with as a father specifically, is they are now, as they get older, the dangers of the world are becoming more of a reality. And how do we prepare them for that without passing on this toxic masculinity that we were taught?
Right. And I feel that same, just so you know, I feel that same tension with my son being 12, 3 years older, about to go into 8th grade. And that is the dividing line. Then you go into high school and my biggest fear is that he gets bullied like you. But my son at that age, he's a mini me, but I was more aggressive. I was the football player just like you. That's not my son's energy, which makes me even more afraid. And here I am on a podcast around redefining masculinity and the dangers of the world, but then also a different world that we're trying to create that isn't assimilating into this like harmful view, And, my biggest teacher has been my partner, because she always reminds me like, hey, you have to have faith that he's going to figure it out. And it's going to look different. And Mike, you have to model strength in a different way. And it's also weird because as dudes, like, we're physically playful. Like, we wrestle, we do all this other stuff that I don't know if it's an innate thing or it's a societal. It's probably all of it. But I'm like, I can see myself becoming your dad. Like, hey, call me, check in. Or like even like straight up tonight, going to the movies, but I'm going with him when I was going to movies by myself at that age,
Right.
And I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that I get closer to something, dude, by us having the convo, because one, I know I'm not alone. Like, we're both as two fathers, like, struggling with it, which, for my dad, he didn't struggle. You just passed it on. Maybe it was because they were working so much. Maybe it's because they were giving so much of their time to the movement that there was maybe less time. I don't know what it was, different generations. But now I definitely see it. And, through these conversations, I've also been learning that, like, the first episode was Jerry Garcia, and he has 3 boys. And he was saying when he was young, he was, scrawny, small. He didn't play any sports, but his weapon was humor. So no one would punk him because he would make them look bad. And that, ever since that conversation, I've been like, well, what then is my son's superpower? Not, I don't want to say to keep him safe, but to help him navigate the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hardest part for me, Tad, has been not imposing who I was at his age on him, because then I'm replicating the same harmful patterns. And it's been hard. It still is hard. And that's why a lot of the stuff I do is just trying to calm myself and not overreact, because everything around us is overreacting. And we both don't know the answers, but I do know I don't want him to do what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mostly, I don't know, I'm afraid of the outside world, like you call it danger, but I have to trust in our fatherhood. Because this is the new definition of fatherhood, just having the conversation.
Yeah, no, I was having actually conversation. I mean, the great thing, and I'm curious now if our fathers were able to talk to their friends who had kids the same age about being fathers, right, and their fears and insecurities, because that's a vulnerability that luckily our generation is closer to getting better at. But I was talking to, so again, I think one of the best things, besides having a great role model as a dad and a mom for my parents, is that this community, right, that I have with, my friends, specifically playing football growing up. I'm still really close to a lot of them. We have this resource of we're all going through these phases together, and we can share notes and talk about it. So I was talking to a friend just the other night about the same thing, because his son's actually the same age as your son. And again, it's this, the fear of you don't want to get. We know. Well, the question I posed to him was, "Are we preparing our kids for a world that no longer exists?" Right? Like because he was specifically talking about, all right, when someone raises up on you, what are you gonna do? And and there's these, again, if you're growing up in the 80s and 90s, the one thing is, well, you just gotta punch one person once, right? And then you'll gain your respect. And that's just like, now it just sounds like just caveman talk. But we were talking of just like, one, our kids are not the same kids we were, but also the world that they're growing up in. Bullying doesn't even happen on the playground no more.
Right.
It's all online, right? And we don't. All those tactics don't work. Like literally, it that has nothing to do with the world they're growing up in. Um, but I do struggle with, as what I realized too, like this whole time, ever since I met you. And I think it's funny because I was thinking back about, you know, um, the first time we met, and basically that was my first time of people who loved me, who cared about me, but were willing to check me or call me in versus call me out. And I remember this is vivid. We were writing signs for a protest, and remember the homie Nick was writing. I don't know if you remember this, but again, caveman, 18-year-old boy. I was like, "Hey Nick, you write like a girl," right? And you were the one that like checked me. Um, but you also knew how to check me because you didn't check me. You said, "Hey Stacy, you know what Tad just said?" And Stacy came at me in the right way. Or I probably may not have listened to you, but
Right.
I was going to listen to Stacy. But anyway, like this whole time since then, I've been trying to empty this cup and unlearn all this toxic masculine. Also, too, a friend of mine just, Colin Ihara, we had a convo, and he actually, I always refer to it as toxic masculinity, but he introduced me to the concept: is it toxic masculinity, or is it all toxic masculinity, or is it hyper masculinity? And is there a difference? And that I've been sitting on that for a while, but I just realized I've been trying to unlearn so much for the last 30 years, but at the same time, as much as I'm trying to pour it out, I'm also constantly pouring it back in. And now, as a father, especially a father to a son who's getting older, those things are being more and more apparent to me. Of like, I'll catch what I'm telling him, and I'm just like, the whole like, if anyone get into your face, don't let anyone like hit. You got to hit them back, and all this stuff. I'm just like, I can't believe I just told my son this. So I'm, and then also too, I think being a husband or being a partner, um, luckily my wife is constantly checking me. I think I have a different reaction when she checks me. It's more being called out than calling in, but definitely as a husband, really being more and more aware of these minor things, but also these big things that, again, 30 years working on it, still feel like I've gained a little bit, but like, it's like, oh man, I got so much to learn, but at the same time, I got to stop pouring it back in, but I don't know how to stop pouring it back in when it comes to, right, your family, when it comes to safety, when it comes to physical danger, or even, I think for Asian Americans, the whole masculinity and racism are intertwined, right? Because for Asian Americans, especially for my dad's generation, it was really being demasculated, right? As men. And so in a misguided way, my way of fighting stereotypes of Asian men as a kid was to be as toxic as possible, was to be the alpha. Like, oh, you don't think this fool's gonna get in your face? I'll get in your face, right? Or even on the football field, right? Like playing Pop Warner, I was always the only Asian kid on the whole field. and maybe other people didn't see me that way, but I saw myself that way, and I felt like I had to one represent, but also two had these like, oh, they just think there's just this weak, skinny
You're
Asian
soft.
kid and have to overcompensate. So I'm realizing how much I overcompensated, but at the same time, it's hard because, maybe it's not true, but in my mind, that did help me. That did help me survive. I I was not bullied. I might have been more of a bully, and now I have to sit with those consequences. But it's I haven't fully let go of that was that was bad. I don't think it's right, but in my mind, it's still I still benefited from it. And then maybe that's the better way to put it. I benefited from that. That doesn't mean it's right either, right? That
Mhm.
goes with privilege and a lot of other things. But now when it comes to conceptually, right, there's one thing, but when it comes to practice with your own kids, and if they don't do certain things, you're worried that they're going to suffer serious consequences. It's kind of on a whole different level now,
Mhm.
or a different situation.
Right. Oh, you're making me realize a lot of stuff right now, Tad. The first thing I was gonna address is just being on tour. I stopped using the term toxic masculinity. One, because the I guess the audience of men I'm trying to reach, uh, that would it's like not an issue of masculinity or femininity because we have both. So if I start labeling toxic, they may misinterpret me saying like it's bad to be a man. And so I've been saying harmful behaviors or thoughts that we have as people that identify as men, because I want the conversation to go and not have it stopped as soon as I say certain words. And then the other thing you're making me really realize right now in this conversation is a lot of my fear, with my son is my own projection of what I did. That I was the bully, that I don't want to bully him. And it's my own kind of reckoning of privilege and power. Because like you, I wanted to be the biggest guy, the biggest football player, because that's what I was taught. To be a man, people had to fear you and you couldn't express emotion and you had to take the first punch and then the first kick and then don't stop. And I started to realize like I was beating up someone else because I was beating up myself because I hated who I was. But I had to lie to myself because that's the lie that we're taught to feel. And so literally I'm realizing, dang, like I'm projecting all the shit that I did at his age onto him. On top of the fact, like you said, it's a totally different world. We didn't have all these gadgets growing up. We were outside playing, and cyberbullying or bullying, even if that, and I'm already putting that out there as if that's going to be his reality when it may not be, you know?
Right.
And so just thank you because I'm having a lot of realizations in real time with this. Before we go to the last segment, I wanted to ask you, is there anything left unsaid to your father or your Ji-Chong that you never shared to them while they were around?
You know, right now I can't think of anything. I mean, and that's why, when my dad, because I know, for example, you didn't have as much time with your dad in his last weeks and
Yeah.
moments. So I'm just left with a lot of gratitude,
Mm.
um, because at least right now, I feel like I was able to say everything, and also too, I think my dad. I mean, you called your son mini me, right? I think my dad always saw me as his mini me, to the point where he knew me better than I did. I knew myself. So he felt that my personality was exactly like his personality. Therefore, he could almost foresee how that would help and how that would not help. And so, yeah, I think there's so many things that were unsaid that didn't have to be said, that were still understood, which I'm makes me feel good. Um, I think with my grandfathers, I'm the namesake of both my grandfathers. So Tadashi, my first name, is my mom's dad's name, and Harukichi, my middle name, is my dad's name. And I've always felt that I'm the combination of both of them. So even though I didn't get to know them as well, I feel like whatever I do is both of them. So there's this really nice connection with my name. So I'll forever be connected with my grandfathers. Actually, I know there's a certain pace, but I wanted to ask you, like, going back, with these men's circles you've been doing, and even the people. Part of one theory I have is that, like, there's the bully. So I'm just wondering, one theory I have, at least my experience, was that I had to be that hyper male to get validated by society as enough. But I think it's only because I got that, okay, you're good, you're enough, then that I could actually step back and try to unlearn and try to balance that. And I'm just curious, because at least with the men's circle that I went to, I what I assumed is that certain people were those alpha males, and they were the ones that were showing up to this men's circle. So I'm just curious if you feel like it is those alphas that have reached this quote unquote part of success or enough to where then they could scale it back, versus if you never got that acknowledgement from society of being masculine enough, where you're then always striving for that. And so I'm just curious with, like, especially the audience that I think of men that you're trying to reach. I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful question. I'd probably say it's the and both. I think there's a real reckoning and cultural kind of battle going on to define manhood in a new generation. And I think, there's a lot of us that maybe adopted a real painful definition what it is. And as we have sons and get older, we start realizing, like, that's not the healthiest for not only our loved ones, but for ourselves. But then I also see right now there's this crisis of loneliness and depression, suicide of men all around. I was sharing, like, Scott Galloway has this new book, and he's talking about, it's almost like 1 in 2 men don't even know how to talk to someone they're interested in. I'm not even putting, like, gender preference on it. I'm just saying we don't have the social skills to know how to talk to a person, which is leading us to be even more secluded and isolated. And I think right now, the medicine, if you will, is to make men feel like less alone, but that they belong in this society, in whoever they are. And it's weird, like, hearing you ask this question, that I was living, like, knowing your story, we both knew how to code switch. And we both knew how to, like, navigate different worlds, whether they were ethnic worlds or class worlds or, like, subculture worlds. So I think, like, in school, I had to be a particular image, but then the real me was actually enamored with and gravitated and attracted to those people that were not society's definition of a tough man. Because within them, I got to see, like, wow, you're resisting a dominant narrative, a story of who you should be, and you're actually, no, this is actually who I am, and I'm comfortable in that. And they were the ones that were always, like, shitted on and bullied, but they were the misfits that always accepted me. And now older, it was an unspoken thing. Like, they knew, like, hey, we're cool, but I get it. I get that you're the jock in this moment, and I get you're the punk rock singer in this. and I love you because you're trying to figure it out. And there was never judgment.
Mm.
It was the dominant society that was always judging me. It was the dominant narrative, but it was our people's, and I say people's, like the collective subcultures that were always like, I see you in this journey. It's almost like, I feel like this healing journey is us remembering who we really are. If we didn't have all these labels and all these false narratives and lies. And I was thinking about when I was being, like, it took me to get jumped by gangsters as a freshman to stop being a bully. Because then I realized, like, I'm never going to be the strongest dude. I'm never going to be the toughest. And even if I was, what is that doing? And I just, my heart is going out to so many men that feel that we have to live this lie that we're never going to be. You know, we're never going to be the top. And that's a symptom of capitalism anyways. Like, we're coexisting, we're interdependent. So the more that we can share that. So I think at least in the men's circles that I've been a part of, I've been able to sit with men of all backgrounds and all like identities. And I think the thing is accepting that we're both the victim and the oppressor at the same time. And you use the analogy of the pouring of the cup and knowing that we are the cup and having grace, because every moment is a choice of what we want to pour in or pour out. And shout out to the wives and the friends who like kind of steer us, hopefully in a loving way, but nonetheless like steer us like, hey, you profess to be this, or you're not modeling that with your own son. And me having the wherewithal, not all the time, but to not to get defensive and be like, heard, you know? So I think I just think right now, the more that we could provide like real spaces of non-judgment and non-shame, then we start to see that we're so much more similar than we are different, and that this conversation and these thoughts that we're having as fathers and as sons and as husbands and brothers, like, we're all having the same thing, but we just don't talk about it. And that's what allows the dominant narrative to like continue to operate and pour, unfortunately, into too many of us. So.
No, that's dope. Yeah, because I think the work that you're doing and other people, right, having these men's circles, having this podcast, having this space, your book, you know, I think especially during undergrad, right, when I was first being shown my own tendencies, right, I think that the concept of having a space for men sounded just so goofy and like why, like the whole world is about men, like what, but at the same time it's the intention, right, and also the reality of, you know, I think Scott Galloway is the one who said it, right, like Trump and the alt right knew that there was this space of vulnerable men who needed to be organized, and we're basically being out organized for young men by conservatives, by corporations, you know, and I think that's just proof, right? The fact that they were able to tap into that pain, insecurity, fear, not knowing who they are, but that the fact that you're doing this is a great model, and I think is showing that it's very much needed, and also there's a huge void that needs to be filled. So, you know, thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Before we get into the second five, I do want to say you said something that's so important for anyone like watching or listening is, how do we teach ourselves a different vocabulary to call in rather than call out men? And I feel like some of the biggest mistakes I've made is thinking that I know more than someone else, or that I'm right and someone's wrong. This binary way of thinking about everything, gender, righteousness, judgment. Like, I'm just trying to throw all that out and just continue to be like a student and a learner, because, like, to your point, the more we shame others, why would we expect them to change? You know, and a lot of what this whole journey is teaching me is we can just model, like, what does a healthy, changing, growing person look like, feel like, and do. And that's why even when we're talking about your dad and having these last moments with them and being like, wow, what an immense privilege that was for Tad to have that. But then being okay with like, well, there's cameras in this room. I want to cry, but I shouldn't cry because then I'm less than a man. But I want Tad to know that, fuck, that's an amazing thing. And there's no words to express this. So you know what? I'm going to let the tear drop if the tear wants to drop. And that's all I can do. And really, and so trying to model that. So to reflect back to you, I just think like we're both on this journey and we're both trying to figure it out. And the more honest we could be about that, I think that is like the roadmap for a map that doesn't exist. So
and actually creating space and time
correct.
to reflect and talk about, because I think that's the hardest thing now. What we're at the age we are, right? We have kids, we have a career, we have a partner. Now we also have older parents that we have to take care of. So it's go, 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 go,
Right.
go. Survival mode, keep above water. But once you actually give that you're doing, you know, for the next 2 hours,
Right.
we're in this space, can't text, can't do your work, have to talk to people face to face. And then, you know, because again, when I was just so surprised how quickly all these dudes got crazy vulnerable, like right away. And I was like, oh, it's because it's been building up and they just need an excuse, an invitation to process that. But I think for me now, it's that time and space now, because everything is just so go, 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 go.
Correct. And if we can make that commitment to our own health and well-being and growth to be, you know, the invitation's always there. I think what our role is that what I've realized nationally or just internationally is like, we don't know the spaces that exist that do exist, because the dominant society doesn't want us to have the time to be still and reflect. Capitalism wants us to burn out.
Mhm.
Capitalism wants us to die being just a cog in this machine. And when we're able to like just be still and literally breathe alongside other men or other people, we get to like have that space to grow. Because everything starts in the imagination, and we don't even have enough time to imagine what would my life look like if I actually lived the life I wanted outside of the boxes that someone told me I'm supposed to be. And that's what space does, like you said.
Mhm.
So cool. Well, we'll transition because
Yeah.
I know. Well, this is just making me want to reflect and share that I need and I want and I desire to make more time with the one and only Tad Nakamura, because I grow as a human in a better way. So one, I have to make that commitment. So this is the last part. It's called the Sacred Five, and it's I ask 5 questions and you respond back in a word or a sentence, and it's our way for listeners to practically hear or get some stuff that they can take with them. So the first question is, what are 3 things that make you feel safe, connected, and whole?
Safe, connected, and whole. I mean, there's, you know, family, community, friends is the short answer, but specifically it's cuddling with my daughter in the morning to wake her up, watching college football on a Saturday, and going on a road trip or trip with my family.
Mm. As a father whose daughter is now older, just enjoy every moment of those mornings, because like your son, there comes a point where they don't want to do that anymore, and it breaks your heart. I remember walking my son to school and waving and being like, don't walk into school, but he's walking, and then there was a point where he just started going You're embarrassing me. The hell out of here, Papa. So enjoy those. All right. Second thing, what's a song, book, or prayer that brings you back to yourself?
Well, can I have two answers? Okay. When you said back, it just reminds me of like taking me back to my own inner child, and
Mm,
the first song that came up in my head was Aisha by Another Bad Creation. It's just the innocence. Um, but I guess presently, I actually learned this reading Michael Strahan's book, Football Player, of meditating and just saying, I am here and here is now. And that's the constant struggle I'm trying to be is to be present.
beautiful. What's one daily ritual or practice that grounds you?
Every morning, right when I wake up, I meditate for 10 minutes, write in my gratitude journal, and that's the way I end the day too. Is write in my gratitude journal 3 things that I'm grateful for or that happen in the day, and meditate.
Beautiful. What's one small action that listeners can take this week on their healing journey?
Small action, drink try to drink a gallon of water a day and go for a walk for at least 15 minutes.
That's a great one. Those are great ones. Last one, Tad. Share a one-line blessing or quote that inspires you.
I mean, just being here with you, just was reminding me, taking me back, from when we first established this bond was at UCLA. I took Peter Sellers' class. The class was, I know this is way longer than one word, but the class was called Art as a Social Action. And, he said, never wait to make your masterpiece. And as a 20-year-old kid, that hit. But then now as a 45-year-old person who just made a film about his dad in time for his dad to see that means something else.
Beautiful. Well, Tad, this is the part where I share things that really like move me or touch me or just lessons. And I guess I'm going to start with this. It's amazing. I'm hopeful that we're at the halfway point of our life, right? And we still have another half. But wow, how amazing it is to bear witness to you being 45 and created a masterpiece. Your film was my favorite film of this year, like hands down. I mean, even on the Stevan video, everyone I talked to, I'm like, "Yo, you got to go see this film. You got to see this film." And not just that it was a masterpiece of art, but it was a masterpiece of how do you tell your father that you love them in words and in non-words. And wow, what a gift. And then to share that. So first things first is, Peter Sellers' quote, don't start working on the masterpiece now because you don't know how short life is. The second thing is I'm so inspired by your curiosity, by your brilliance, by your willingness to keep asking the questions because we don't know the answers. And sometimes we stop ourselves because we don't have the answer, but the answer is actually within the question. And even the fact that you're like, hey, Mike, like I have this question for you. From day one, that's always been you. Always wanting to be a better person and always being intentional, surrounding yourself with people and communities that will bring out the greatest version of Tad. And then the last thing I just want to share is I thank you for modeling for me the kind of father I want to be. And knowing that I have someone else that when I do fall, which I will, because it's human nature, like I can call and you'll pick up the phone and you'll actually give me advice or words without any kind of like shame, and just in fact be like, hey, I did the same thing. It's all right. There's going to be another day, another moment too. And you're one of the few men that I know that will have the courage enough to say, I'm sorry and I'll do better next time. So I'll just end by saying like the 3 most powerful words in my life, which is, I love you dearly. And I'm so grateful for Creator and our fathers for continuing to bring us together in this like sacred dance that we have. And I hope you know how much I and so many others, including your father, love you, because you are like our wildest dream come true. And so just thank you for the decades of friendship and the decades of artistry, and just for being the amazing person that you are.
No, thank you. And, I love you too. And, I talked about it earlier, but, again, right, the culture we grew up in is I'll have your back. I'm going to back you up anytime, automatic. Like, and maybe it was intentional, maybe it was not, but when I needed someone the most, driving back to my house in the morning after spending a night with my dad, not knowing if that was going to be the last time I was ever going to see him take a breath, your book was there and your voice was there. And therefore your father, your family, your community was there at a time that I needed it the most. And so I'll always be grateful for that. And just know that. And I'm sure your book and this podcast is doing that for so many people that you'll never know. But yeah, I'll always specifically be grateful for that moment, as well as just you always being the big homie, always being the role model and doing it with creativity, with love and style that makes me want to continue trying to get better, trying to ask those questions. And I love you, and I really appreciate you. And also just the serendipity, I mentioned it earlier, but right after this I'm gonna drive with my family on a road trip up to Pismo Beach, but we're gonna go on the 101. We're gonna drive through Oxnard and Ventura, so I'll make sure to salute your pops while we're doing that.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Tad, so much.
Yeah. All right, man. Love you.
I love you too.
Sacred Lessons is a production of iHeart's My Cultura podcast network, Sacred Lessons Media, and the Prince Group. For more of your favorite shows, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.